Hey everybody, Yankee here. Today I want to answer a technical question about revolvers that I received from a viewer. It's a question I've got before, and I thought I'd go ahead and answer it here in video form. They asked me, hey Yank, how do safeties work on revolvers? And I know a lot of you right now are thinking, well, most revolvers don't have safeties. That was kind of my first response too. Not response, but reaction. I was like, well, most revolvers don't have safeties, just like I said. You know, there are exceptions like the Rough Rider that has a manual safety, but those are mainly used by kids, I think is why they have that. But most revolvers don't have a manual safety, but almost all revolvers these days, in fact, I would say all, unless they're very true replicas of old school guns, have some type of passive safety. And that's what the viewer was asking about, because as I read on in their email, they wanted to know the difference between the types of safeties revolvers use to make it safe to carry all the cylinders loaded. Back in the day, you had to leave a cylinder empty and keep the hammer down on that cylinder if you wanted to be really safe. Like you were riding around on horseback and you didn't want it bouncing out of your holster or out of your saddlebag and going off. You left one cylinder empty. But nowadays you don't have to do that, and it's because of the passive safeties. And there's generally two types of passive safety that you're going to see all the time. You're going to see hammer blocks and you're going to see transfer bars. And he wanted to know how these two things function. How are they the same and how are they different? Well, basically the answer to that is they do the same thing. They prevent the gun from actually firing unless the trigger is pulled. But they do it by acting in exactly opposite ways. They do the opposite thing, but they achieve the same goal. And what I mean by that is best shown in a demonstration here. So let's first look at a hammer block safety. Now, most modern guns have internal firing pins, so we're first going to deal with that. And in this case here, like I said, we're looking at a hammer block safety with an internal firing pin. The firing pin is mounted in the frame of the gun. It's got a little button at the back that the hammer has to make contact with to make the round fire. Now, the hammer block is a little piece of metal that slides up between the hammer and that little firing pin button, the face of the wall that is sitting on. That keeps the hammer from coming all the way forward and hitting that button. That makes this gun safe to carry fully loaded because even if something was to hit the back of that hammer, it can't go farther forward because of that piece of metal blocking it. And the energy can't transfer into the firing pin button because they're not touching. There's an air gap there. So that prevents the gun from firing accidentally. Now, when you cock the hammer back or pull the trigger, that little bar is pulled down out of the way. And when you continue pulling the trigger or pull the trigger after you've cocked the hammer back, the hammer goes forward, strikes the firing pin button, the gun goes off, and then the trigger spring resets the mechanism, pushes the bar back up, removes the hammer from the firing pin, resets everything. That's how a hammer block works. It just prevents the hammer from going all the way forward and touching the firing pin or the firing pin button. Now let's look at a transfer bar safety. Now you might look at this picture and think, well, that looks exactly like the hammer block. But it's different because here's the big difference. If this wasn't there, the hammer would not go forward and touch the firing pin. The hammer cannot go all the way forward and touch that button on its own. It can't do it. It's just made to where that's as far forward as it can go. So in this setup, you actually have kind of two safeties because that transfer bar is kind of in the way sometimes of the hammer going all the way forward, and the hammer itself can't actually go far enough forward to strike the button, so it's very safe to carry the gun fully loaded. Energy can't transfer from that hammer into that firing pin if it gets struck from behind or dropped on its hammer or anything like that. So there's one difference between the transfer bar and the hammer block. On the transfer bar, the hammer doesn't go all the way forward. On a hammer block gun, the hammer can definitely go all the way forward and touch the button if the bar is not there. Now, as you pull the trigger or cock the hammer on this gun, the transfer bar safety gun, you'll notice that this is where it operates exactly the opposite. Instead of pulling that little piece of metal, that block, down out of the way, it pushes it up between the hammer and the firing pin button there. So when you continue pulling the trigger or pull the trigger after you've cocked the hammer goes all the way forward, strikes the transfer bar strikes the firing pin button. The energy transfers through now because there's something between the two items. There's no air gap, and that is what lets it fire. Instead of blocking the hammer from coming forward, it actually makes the hammer come forward a little bit less, but it fills the gap between the hammer and the button. Whereas in the hammer block, it creates the gap between the hammer and the button. Then the trigger spring does its thing, resets the trigger, pulls the transfer bar down, resets the hammer, and you're ready to go again. So as you can see, like I said, they do the same thing. They keep the gun from firing without the trigger being pulled, but they do it in opposite ways. Now, most single action guns operate just like this. This was pretty much a double action, single action setup I was showing you here. But in single action guns, operates pretty much exactly the same, except for when you have a firing pin on the hammer. Single actions are pretty much the only modern revolvers that still do that. But when you have the firing pin on the hammer, you pretty much have to use a hammer block. For obvious reasons, a transfer bar is not going to work really well here with the firing pin on the hammer because that firing pin would have to be pushed back pretty far for a hammer block to be used. Or the transfer bar would have to somehow be internal, which is a whole other thing. So like I said, they just use a hammer block. It's the same thing. There's a little piece of metal up between the base of the hammer and the body of the gun that prevents the hammer from going all the way into its seated position. And then when you pull the hammer back, putting in the cock position, it drops that little bar down. And when you pull the trigger, it's able to go all the way forward and allow that gun to fire. One big difference here is that since the trigger doesn't reset automatically, you're actually resetting this mechanism when you go to cock the hammer again. That first little click resets everything back to where it's ready to go, and you can start all over again. And you're not in any danger simply because the hammer is all the way forward, because that shell is already spent. So nothing to worry about there. If you're going to carry the gun fully loaded, though, you want to make sure it's in the safe position. So there you have it in a nutshell. That's basically the two types of passive safeties that are used on revolvers, be they double action, single action, or single action only. The transfer bar and the hammer block. So that's what they are, and that's how they work, and that's why it's safe to carry modern revolvers fully loaded. Hey everybody, please don't forget that this is November, which means we are doing Toy Guns for Tots 2023 throughout the entire month. So if you want to help out, if you want to donate, please go over to TYMPpistolproject.com. There's a link in the upper corner of this video. You can either donate directly or you can buy merchandise. If you donate directly, for every $20 you raise for Toy Guns for Tots, you will get one entry into a drawing at the end of the fundraiser for at least one Glock Gen 5 G20. You can also get entries into the drawing by purchasing the ornament that is available over there, or buying the t-shirt that says, I donated to Toy Guns for Tots and all I got was this lousy t-shirt. Both of those items also come with an entry into the drawing at the end of the fundraiser. Or you can just buy some merch from the Toy Guns for Tots store and show your support for the program. All the profits do go to support Toy Guns for Tots. Also remember that we are still doing TYMP, the Yankee Marshall Pistol Project. If you feel that you could benefit from it, go over to that same link up in the corner, TYMPpistolproject.com, and register. If you have no need to benefit from TYMP, but you would like to support it, go on over and buy any general merchandise that is not Toy Guns for Tots merchandise, and all those proceeds will go to fund TYMP. There are new designs over there all the time. I try to add at least one design every week so people have choices. So go on over, pick up some merch, and support the Yankee Marshall Posse Pistol Project.